Hello and welcome to Your Coaching Journey, a podcast for doctors about coaching. Whether you're a coaching doctor, a doctor who is learning to coach, or a doctor who'd like to build coaching into your professional life, then this is the podcast for you.
Hi, I'm Helen Leathers, and with me today is my co-host and business partner, Tom Dillon. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, Helen. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Good. I am also very well this morning.
Which superhero?
Oh, which superhero? Okay, let's go. Iron Man.
Oh.
Happy.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I think I just aspire to be Wonder Woman every day.
I think actually Wonder Woman on my mood board is focused. So yes, feel free to be Wonder Woman this morning.
Okay, will do. Today we are going to be talking a little bit about values.
We are, yes.
In this episode.
Which, yeah, to be honest, I think I missed out on the values piece. So when I did my initial training, and I did a couple of years of training, 4 years of training, including my master's, no one ever talked about values.
Really?
It wasn't a thing. I guess my first course was coaching and mentoring. Mm-hmm. So it was very organisational based. The second one was coaching. The master's was coaching, but no one really, unless I've completely blanked it out and forgotten it, but I really don't remember doing values at all in the beginning of my coaching journey.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I did.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. You use values a lot, and I do use values. Having a conversation yesterday with someone, and he's got a problem with someone in his team, and I said, when we talked about his values in previous sessions, and I said, you know your values, and you know what you want for the organisation. To what extent is she living those values? Mm. He said she's not aligned to the values at all. So it was and I don't think he was there in that. He was just had this problem with this person, the way they were behaving, and didn't. Yeah, but actually relating it back to his values was really useful for him to go, no, actually you're right, and if that's important to me and for the organisation, that those values are being honoured. Yeah, so if we stick to that.
Interesting. So. Yeah. But we need to know our values in order to have those conversations.
I've taken the conversation in a way that you hadn't intended. So let's start with where we were going to start at the beginning of our conversation in values. Tell us, what are values?
I think values, there can be lots of different kind of descriptors of values. But for me, values are concepts and ideas that are almost timeless, that are lenses through which we see the world. They are... I always like this. My coach mentor, when I did my coach training, always said they are things you cannot put in wheelbarrows. So they're the things that we have learnt or developed within us that are important to us, and they drive our behaviours. They help us to make decisions, and we will make meaning of the world through them as a lens. So if trust is important to us and we look through the world with the lens of trust, things that are done to us, things that are done by us will be influenced and perceived through that lens.
Yeah, I've actually stolen your can't be put in a wheelbarrow. And I do get challenged on it quite a bit when I introduce it to students. Yeah. And they say, weird, but what about family?
That comes up all the time.
I have a value of family. I said, well, no, it can't be, because you can put it in a wheelbarrow.
I mean, they wouldn't like it, but you could put your family in a wheelbarrow. And the other thing that comes up often in that respect when we're talking about values is books. People will say, I value books. Yeah. And they're a thing. You can put them in a wheelbarrow.
What's the value that sits behind family?
That's exactly the question I would ask a client.
That's what I tend to ask them too.
Yeah, because the value that perhaps I would put behind family, what it gives me, could be very different to the value that you or someone else would put behind family. And I think books is a great way to explore this, because for some people books mean wisdom. For some people books mean information and knowledge. And for other people books mean escape and living in, being able to explore creativity and all sorts of things. So freedom, because maybe they couldn't, if someone was housebound, as an example, a book might give them that freedom of thought and imagination. So the value that sits behind those is what's important. So if you're working with someone who says family is a value, I would say, what does family give you? And again, that could be security, stability, love, a sense of meaning. There's so many values that sit behind that. So I love that concept of, can you put it in a wheelbarrow? It also gives me an image in my head of my family sitting in a wheelbarrow. Which amuses me.
They wouldn't like it.
They wouldn't like it. And also it would have to be a pretty big wheelbarrow.
Yeah.
So what do you have to add to that idea of what values are?
I think something that was coming to my mind, and we'll go there and see where it takes us. I was thinking of, we have a relationship with Kant's categorical imperatives, don't we?
Yeah, sometimes you can say it as well.
So Kant's categorical imperative is that you shouldn't have anything as a rule that you wouldn't apply universally.
Yes, or you couldn't apply universally.
So thinking about that, and that's the interesting thing for me about values. So you can have your values, they'll be totally different to other people's values.
Yes.
Are we expecting other people to honour our values?
That's a really good question.
Because it seems to me that where we kind of run into challenge around values is that we will have our values, but then when someone else doesn't honour them, we think they're wrong.
Yeah, I think I have a concept of there being this possibly innumerable list of values, and each value gets a score for me in terms of how important it is. And those scores are what will be different for everybody, potentially. I don't think there are many sort of common values that someone would say are absolutely not important to me. You might get a score of 1 or half, but they wouldn't be completely unimportant. So I think we just have different scores, a different place in our hierarchy of values where those values might sit. And I think we talk about coaching being an awareness, and I think having the awareness that our values, our top 6 values, for example, might be different to someone else's, helps us to understand people's motivations, intentions, and behaviours sometimes. Doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means there might be a difference of opinion. Where we run into real problems is where someone tramples on, crushes, and completely dishonours our values. And that's often when we get a bit... I think often that means we stand up. You know, when we've seen people stand up literally and metaphorically, we saw it during lockdown with marches for, for women's safety on the streets, that kind of thing. That's where people get riled and get that fire in their belly and want to stand up for themselves.
What do you think
others.
the value was for those people doing that?
I think there will be all sorts of values that sit behind that, but there would have been values like independence. There would have been values like equality. There would have been values like safety, that all would have been trampled on by the situation. I'm thinking particularly with Sarah Everard, and also the Black Lives Matter movement. There's also, that feeling of injustice.
Yeah.
Fairness is another value that sits there.
Yeah.
And when those get trampled on, we can get that fire in our belly.
Yeah. It's interesting. Our previous podcast was about personality and that recognising individual differences. And one of the elements that comes out of the thinking-feeling dichotomy is people with a thinking preference tend to think of fairness as treating everyone equally. People with a feeling preference tend to think of fairness as treating everyone as they need to be treated. So treating them differently. So that's interesting. So different concepts of fairness could have an impact on how you show up and whether you honour someone's values.
Yes, and I think that brings up that idea that also you've just said there, my translation of fairness might be different to someone else's. Yeah. So when we're working in the coaching room, one of the things we absolutely have to do is have no assumptions about what those values mean to someone. I know that I can explain my value of wisdom. It might be very different to someone else's explanation of their concept of wisdom. So when we're with a client, we want to explore okay, you've mentioned wisdom there. What does that mean for you? So that they know. They might never have thought about it before. And I think that that's really key when we're working.
And I think there's a danger there, isn't there, that people will have values that they've never really thought about before. And that when they stop to think about them, they go, well, actually, is that a value? They think it's a value, but it's perhaps not.
Yeah. And that's really interesting. So I think we can come on to shortly what happens in the coaching room when we explore the values more deeply. Why would you say values are important?
It's almost a moot point, isn't it?
They just are, aren't they?
They just are, aren't they? But I think they're very easily ignored.
Yes.
And I think, like I say, I spent years in the coaching room not talking about values because no one had ever told me that was a thing in coaching. So, and I, again, working in organisations, I will have talked to people about organisational values as though those were the important values. I think it's very hard to find a set of organisational values that everyone adheres to. And they tend to, again, be brought about as let's have some values. And people pay lip service. Very, very rarely do I go into an organisation where people tell me what the company's values are. And they'll be on the wall behind them and they won't have a clue. And they go, is honesty in there somewhere? And I find honesty is always an interesting one. So whenever I do workshops and ask people what their values are, not so much in the coaching room, but in workshops, people there will always be 2 or 3 people that put honesty as a value. And having studied psychology suggests that we all lie 10 times a day, more if you're married. And so then that's interesting, isn't it? Because we probably are lying. Most of us are lying at some point during the day for whatever reason, but we're not always being authentic or honest. Or so to have it as an aspirational value maybe and expecting it from other people may be really unrealistic. But we might have it as a value, and I think it's sort of when you stop to explore it with a coachee. So you said, you'd ask them what honesty meant to them. It might be that they never lie and they expect no one else to ever lie. And their life might be really tough because they have that expectation. Yeah. So I think you're right that it's really important to drill down into what is important to them in the value. What does it mean to them? We can't just assume that it means what we take it to mean.
Yeah.
One of the exercises I quite often do is get them to have a string of values. So integrity, authenticity, honesty, they kind of go together, don't they?
Yes.
So you can have that as a...
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, I think we mentioned it on a listener's question a while back about how do you elicit someone's values. And we mentioned a number of ways that you could do that by using values cards. I ask them, I keep it simple. What other ways have we got that we could find out?
I quite often just used a grid. So I've got 60 words on a screen and say, let's go through them and pick out if these are your values, let's pick out the ones that are important to you. I try to narrow it down to about 6. I'm not offended if they have 9, if they really want to hang on to 9, that's fine. But I think it's hard to have everything as important to you.
Yes.
I know Brené Brown talks about only being able to have 2 core values. That's the most you can have. I don't think she believes that, because I've heard her say another. She said, "Oh, yeah, but I've also got this one. This comes in." And well, yeah, see, actually, what you're saying isn't what you think. I'm sure she thought it at the time, believed it at the time, but I think she's fluid in that other values do creep in.
And that, brings me back to that idea of values having a score, because I think one of the things I get asked a lot is, can your values change? And I think it's not that your values change, it's just that they might float to the surface a bit more. The score might go up and down in different situations. So you might have a slightly different top 5 values at work than you do at home, or than you do in a relationship. And then you might have, top 5 generally in life. And depending on what's going on for you, there'll be different levels of importance. And so one of the things that I like to ask people, once we've got some core values or some, top 5, 6 values, is how are these showing up in your life? Or to what extent are they showing up in your life? And that's actually, just to put a warning out there, that's a difficult conversation. Because once we've established values, if someone's values aren't present, if they aren't spending time, money, energy on them, or if they're not being honoured by other people, that realisation can be quite devastating.
Yeah.
And so I think in the coaching room, then we can explore how you can refocus your life on those values and bring them back into focus, bring them back into your priorities. So if health is a value, but you are not honouring it, how could you do that? I think that's where coaching can be really, amazing.
It's that exploration of how you bring that into your life, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do use a grid if I'm online. I have created a set of values coaching cards that I use when I'm in person, so available on the website. So what I will do, where I find it quite often comes up is when people are challenged within a particular environment. So the guy I was talking about, where he's got this challenge with this lady in his team, he knows his values, and I know that he knows his values because we've done that work. But if he hadn't known his values, that would be the point at going, so what values do you have that this is banging up against? This situation is obviously interfering in some way. So what values is it jarring with? And then he would explore his values in that way and bring it into play. And I think that's quite often where people realise what their values are because something's making them angry or disturbed in some way.
Yes, because some months ago you said to me, what are your top 5 values? And I reeled them off, and you said independence isn't in there. And I suddenly thought, and we had a whole conversation around that. And I think you said to me, well, what happens if I turned around to you and said, I don't want you going to the gym anymore? And I may have been rude back to you. But I think you can have values that are hidden, and you can have values that have become such a part of your life. For me, independence is such an integral part of my life that I actually almost forget that it's a value. And it would only be, as you so wonderfully demonstrated, if someone challenged that value, that I would say, no, hold on, that's important to me, and that's a core part of who I am, and I don't want that compromised. So values are fascinating.
I guess being in a business partnership is a compromise on your independence. Having been someone who's worked alone for a while, that's a compromise, isn't it? But a compromise you're willing to make.
But also, to me, it's not a compromise because one of my other values is connection.
Yeah, but they seem diametrically opposed.
They do, don't they?
Yes.
What values do you have?
Connection, independence.
Yeah. See, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. And then, so when Brené Brown talks about you can only have 2 core values, well, there are 2 values that I have that are opposed. They can fit together, but I do value both, and I wouldn't want to give either up.
Exactly.
I also have perspective. I think that's really important to me, that people, that I look at things from different perspective and take that view, but also that other people do that. So that I don't like people being narrow-minded about things and being shut off from things. So independence, learning is very much a value. Don't think it was always. I think it's always been there a little bit, but more important now. Openness. So I don't have honesty, but I have openness. I want people to be able to talk, which I guess is why I'm a coach. I really value that authenticity, that openness within a conversation. So connection, and then kindness. And I was talking to someone the other day, and they said, so kindness. So when is that a problem for you? I said, well, I live a life where it's not really. I find that I'm kind all of the time. Maybe Donald Trump brings out another side of me.
Yeah.
But on the whole, in terms of my interactions with people on a daily basis, I find the opportunity to be kind. And I want people to be kind to other people. So, yeah, so that's the sort of conversation you want to have in the coaching room, isn't it? Of what it means to people, how it shows up, when it's not showing up. And I think your time, energy and money thing, if those people aren't spending the time engaging with their values, then that's problematic.
Yes.
They're probably going to be quite unhappy.
Absolutely. So for me, and I like the idea of that chain of values, because I have energy as a value. And that might sound odd, but to me it makes sense because it brings in a number of elements. So it is one of those chains. And for me, it's my own inner energy physically, but also esoterically, if you like. And it's how I gain energy and how I maintain my energy. But it also includes health within that. So, if I spend time, energy and money on my health, on maintaining my energy, then I'm honouring that core value of mine and I'm living in alignment. And I think that's the key with the work that I do in particular. I think that when people are in alignment with their values, they tend to be living a good life that they're happy with. And when we might need to coach them to get back on track, to get back in alignment with those values, I think is really interesting and really powerful. So we're talking about values in a very big overview because it's
we didn't hear the rest of your values. What were your other values?
Okay, so wisdom is one of my values. And for me, wisdom is not just learning, but it's gaining information and then finding a way to, I suppose, assimilate that information and share it with others.
Okay.
So
very much in line with what you're doing on the podcast.
Yes, and it's what I've always done. I've run training since 95, 96, and I know I started very young, but I've always done it. And in working with my values, I've gone, oh, that's what I do. That's what's important to me. And when I'm not doing that, I feel like there's something missing. So wisdom, energy, connection, independence, as we've discovered, also trust as well. And for me, that's, I suppose, my version of spirituality, that trust in myself, that trust in something bigger than me. And that's a very nuanced value for me and quite nebulous, I suppose. But so long as that trust is there, then I feel very centred.
Yeah, I had an interesting conversation at the weekend. I was on a course and we were talking about all sorts of things, but trust came up for someone that they were struggling to trust other people. And had stuff happen in the past, relationships that had not worked out, and said, I can't trust other people. But there was that conversation about being able to trust yourself, and if you can hold yourself in that place of trust, then trusting people initially, being able to hold that space for other people, knowing that you have yourself, you're in support of yourself. But it was an interesting conversation that trust was important to her, but she didn't feel able to offer that trust to others. So it's complex, isn't it? And obviously that brings in life events that are going to influence our values. And
yes, the way we've brought up will influence our values, our experiences. And, how we use it in the coaching room, there's so many ways because it covers all of our life, doesn't it? But even we've mentioned this on the podcast before, that when I had in my head how I wanted or what values were important to me in a relationship, it was not long after that we met. And you had no idea, but the things that you were saying hit all my values, all my relationship values. And I think, so even if someone is relationship coaching, values is going to come into it, perhaps more importantly in a relationship coaching than some, it's arguable that you need to have shared values in a relationship.
Yeah, don't think I'd ever thought about that. I think I just quite liked you. I think I just fancied you.
And we talked about psychology.
Yes, we did talk about psychology. Luckily, we have quite aligned values.
Yes.
It might have been problematic if they weren't. Good. On that note, let's draw the conversation to a close. Thank you very much. That's been fascinating.
So,
dip into the arena of values. It is something that we cover more extensively on our transformational coaching diploma. So if you're looking for some coaching training, then that's a great place to start. So next time on the podcast, we will be looking at questions from our listeners. So another Q&A session, which we always look forward to. And if you have any questions, do send them in to us. We've had someone recently send 2 questions in. So bit greedy. But we're always happy to receive some questions and happy to include them on the programme. They can be anonymous if you'd like them to be anonymous, but always happy to share your name as well. Lovely. So thank you, Helen. Look forward to seeing you next time.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.